Exploring Healthier Masculinity Within Business, a monthly call for executive and senior leaders within industry who too rarely have a space to stop, to breathe, to take off the weight of being a leader of teams and organizations. Taking place on the first Monday of every month. Email gary.turner@radicality.co.uk. Hi, everyone. Welcome back, not even welcome back. Welcome to the next episode of In the Business of Healthy Masculinity. You'll be finding us on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and potentially on Substack. I'm really excited to bring someone to you that is relatively new in my world, but Peter Olusoga is a chartered psychologist, senior lecturer in psychology at Sheffield Hallam Uni, but also host of the 80% Mental podcast. And I just want to say thank you, Peter, for sharing a half hour of your time today. How's things with you?
Very well. Very good. Thank you. I very much appreciate the invitation to come and chat to you this morning. So yeah, thank you.
Well, where do we go? Psychologist, high performance sports, world's burning down. Where the heck do we start, Peter?
Well, where would you like to start? I guess there's plenty of stuff going on right now, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. I think what I'm really interested in, when we had our sort of first meet and greet, with the sort of topic around paradox came up. And I think for me, I'm working in, corporate spaces, big business space, you're teaching, you've got your high performing sports sort of podcast, etc. And I think that as a sort of starting point would be quite interesting, because I don't know about you, but I've been brought up, certainly my first 49 years on the planet, that things are one way and there is a best way or the only way to do things. And I think maybe that's an interesting starting point with a lot of the stuff that's going on in the world, what happened at the Oscars or BAFTAs recently. Like, how does that show up within your work and maybe your own experience when you think about that sort of binary, there is only one right way to do something or be?
I guess in the world that I work in, I suppose, like you mentioned, high performance sport, a lot of the narrative around sport is around this kind of like hyper masculine, like grit and resilience and sort of pushing through pressure and adversity. And it doesn't kind of really leave a lot of room for being vulnerable and sort of seeking help, mental health issues, all that sort of stuff. So the idea of there's only one way to be, high performance sports, and I guess high performance environments more generally, are sort of driven by this performance narrative where it's all about the win and it's all about the success. And we don't necessarily tend to stop and think about what that success actually means and maybe what we have to compromise on in order to achieve it. So I think, in terms of this idea of there's only sort of one way of being, one way of doing things, certainly in high performance sports, that's how it shows up.
That's really intriguing. So, because I'll bring it into my context in business, Peter, in a bit, but I find it really interesting that ultimately in a high performance environment, though, there is a win, right? There is a medal, or there is a cup, or there is a fill in the blank at the end of that focus.
Well, there is, but only for one person or one team, right? So
yeah,
we've got to think about everybody else too.
Yeah. And that's really interesting. I love you challenged me back straight away on that, because that's that sort of landscape, shall we call it, the high performance landscape, is very individualistic, isn't it? It's not a collective approach.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. And again, we can look at the difference between sort of team sports and individual sports, but that there is very much in this sort of drive to succeed, we kind of often only think about the people who end up at the top, right? So for every team that wins the English Premier League, right, there's what, 20 players? But there's like 400 players in total. So you got like 380 players who aren't winning the Premier League every single year, So when we think about success in those ways, again, we sort of tend to focus on, well, what are the people who are winning? What are they doing? What are their characteristics, right? They've sacrificed this and they've done this but there's 380 other players who've also done that, but just haven't succeeded. They haven't won. So this is like survivorship bias, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it is a sort of very individualistic sort of drive for success, but that kind of reflects, our culture, this individualistic society that we find ourselves in.
So I'm really curious. You got my juices flowing now, Peter. So, which is good news. I'm really feeling into now. So, and this is a real passion of mine actually, is how do we how do we learn better? And now what I mean by that is, if I take my organizational context, so I work within a corporate, it's got 5,000 employees globally, 5 billion turnover. That's a lot of collective intelligence. That's a lot of wisdom. That's a lot of lived experience that, if I'm honest with you, Peter, most days, most months, most years is hardly ever being tapped into outside of we need to hit the budget, or we need to buy a company, or again, that sort of hyper narrow metric that says you are good or you're not good. How does that sort of show up for you within your teaching or within your high performance? Like, what opportunity is there? How do we share learning, failure, what's possible better across those 200 sort of high performing sports people in the Premier League, rather than just focusing on that myopic result?
Sure. I think the interesting thing you said there was about sharing failure, and we just kind of don't really do that, do we? You know, if you mentioned sort of LinkedIn before we came on the podcast here, and you know, LinkedIn is a perfect kind of example of where all we ever see is like success, right? People posting all of the amazing things they've done and how thrilled and delighted they are to do something which is basically just part of their jobs. So we don't. We often don't think about failure, and there's a lot we can learn from that. And there's a lot we can learn if we take the time to really evaluate. So again, you know, I come back to sort of high performance sports and, you know, sports psychology. And it's great when we sort of achieve success. But what we need to constantly be doing is evaluating what are some of the things that went well? What are some of the things that went wrong? Why did they go well? Why did they go wrong? What can we learn from that? So providing those sort of opportunities to do that, providing opportunities for sort of constant reflection, is really important. And I think as far as leadership goes, it's about not always needing to be the loudest voice in the room, not always needing to have the last word, and actually, you know, providing that space and that opportunity for other people to have their voice and to feedback without fear of being judged or criticized or you know, kind of ridiculed for what they have to say.
Yeah, it resonates a lot with me. I actually I led a team culture change actually within a business back in 2015, 2018, Peter, and we sort of evidenced a sort of 6 million sales increase, 1.5 million margin, same people, macroeconomic environment was similar. So we could sort of point that there was enough qualitative data that said that it was due to that particular change that led to that result, right? And I think what was really interesting to me is that we went through a whole process with London Business School to try and make that a MBA case study. They were really interested. We did all of the work on the scoping, the interviews. There's like 1.5 years work went into building that case study. Where did it fall over? The senior leadership within this particular company, Peter, when it got to the rub of having to go, right, we publish, they said, no, we can't do that. We'll only let it publish if we can take all of the things where we failed out.
Right.
And this was literally at the top of the organization. It's going to become an MBA case study for the next generation of leaders. And I thought, from a paradoxical irony point of view, like there was an opportunity to share like a real life case study within a really significant organization in the business world. But because they weren't allowed to be vulnerable, as you said, they wouldn't let themselves go, oh, we aren't perfect, we do make mistakes. They completely canned this whole opportunity to raise their profile as a business, actually. I thought that's so just maddening.
Yeah, it is. And again, it's this sort of hesitation to show any kind of vulnerability because it's just seen as a sign of weakness, right? If you're not doing that well, then you're not a good company, rather than thinking about, well, you know, acknowledging the things that they're doing poorly or acknowledging things that they could do better is actually like a real sort of strength, rather than kind of, you know, blindly continuing along this path of like everything's fine. You know, we can look at that honest evaluation and vulnerability as something that's actually a sign of real strength.
Mm-hmm. And do you mind me asking, how has it come up for you in your career in terms of, have you always been in a position where you as Peter have been able to be vulnerable? Have you had your own sort of level of journey of having to practice that muscle? Is it something that's always been quite intuitive for you? It's
a really interesting question, because in academia there is a sort of expectation to do lots of different things, right? So there's an expectation to publish research. There's an expectation to be an expert in your field. There's an expectation to be on social media and kind of doing all those things. So that there are a lot of like expectations of the way in which an academic should produce, and lots of it is about kind of production. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I guess I've sort of wrangled with that, because it's like I often sort of describe myself as an inherently lazy person, and it's not that I'm lazy. I've never quite bought in to this idea of being like ridiculously ambitious, so I don't want to be the best sports psychologist in the world. I don't want to be, the head of my university or the head of my department. Like, I just don't have the ambitions to do that. So I think, like, personally, I've probably found it a little bit easier to just sort of show that little bit of vulnerability, I guess. But it is difficult. It is a tricky thing to do, because the sort of systems around us don't necessarily allow for it or reward it as much as maybe they probably should do.
Oh, you've really hit on something I'd love us to explore, Peter. That rewarding thing. So something I wrangle with it most days in a corporate world, which is, how do you? And I'm wondering, from a psychology point of view, from your own experience point of view, what are some shifts that we can sort of invite? So let's say we've got a senior leader, we've got CEO, executive committee, got to hit the numbers, got to grow the business, all the standard metrics. How do we invite them to consider failure, consider slowing down, consider stopping, to be valuable as actually hitting the numbers? Is there anything psychological in your experience that's helpful around this?
Well, I guess I can, if I bring it back to, again, my own work in sport and the work that I do with high performance sports and high performance environments, and I work a lot with coaches rather than athletes. And one of the things that I try and talk about a lot is this idea of like well-being and self-care. But I kind of talk about that in terms of it being a performance strategy. So this isn't like something that we can do if, just because we're feeling altruistic. Isn't it nice to look after our workforce and, make them feel nice? It's more about, well, this is a performance strategy. If you've got a workforce that are engaged in their own well-being and looking after themselves and taking the time to practice self-care, and you are creating an organization which gives people the time and the opportunity in order to practice that self-care, then you've got a happier, healthier, more productive, if productivity is the thing that we're really after, workforce, right? So it's a sort of strategic imperative almost to look after the well-being of your employees, and part of that is about thinking about what do you really value as an organization, and how can those values match up with the values of the individual people within that organization. So are you even just exploring that at all? Mm-hmm. Or are you just sort of blindly, again, well, this is our mission statement and these are our values, and somebody somewhere has decided what those values and mission statement are, and they're not reflective of the people who actually work in the organization. So yeah, kind of exploring that values bit, I think, is a sort of a really important part of cultivating the well-being of the people within an organization. I've no idea whether I actually answered your question.
Yeah, you definitely did in part, for sure, Peter. I say we always have an emergent conversation on this platform, Peter, and I'm trying to put myself in the shoes as we speak of a few people that I know within my industry, which is chemicals, right? It's extractive industry is quite traditional.
Yeah.
But what's intriguing is there's a lot of younger people that are coming into, obviously, all sectors, but particularly this quite traditional one. And I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the senior leaders going, right, well-being as a performance strategy. Yeah, it doesn't bother me. I've only got 10 years left. I don't have to worry about that sort of thing. And I'm just trying to think into I'm trying to feel into or think into the psychology of what. Yeah, there's no real answer or question at the moment here. I'm just sort of pondering, really, Peter, which is, I'm just trying to think about that bridge. What could some of those bridges be to reach someone that maybe has power in the system, that ultimately cares about performance, but has this whole swathe of people, back to the thing about the collective. How do we wake up? In my context, I'm going to use you for a second. Excuse me, I don't want to be too extractive. But what are sort of the questions we can be asking? How do we ignite curiosity in people that maybe not normally curious?
I think first of all, honestly, sometimes it's just there's a bottom line. There just is a bottom line, right? And if you can demonstrate that actually, if you're looking after the people in your workforce, then your bottom line will improve.
Yeah.
So there's a really sort of cynical, stark financial benefit to it, right? So that's one way of reaching people, I think. But I think, like, the other thing to perhaps consider is, I'm trying to think how I might phrase this. Yeah, hopefully you can edit out the minutes pause here while I think about what I'm going to say.
Pause is good. Pause is good.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, like, again, it's about thinking about the people that you're working with and what you want, what your personal values are, right? In a leadership position, like, what are your personal values? Like, are you completely uninterested in other people? Like, are people disposable to you? Are people just sort of this widget, right? This sort of like cog in a machine. And are you okay with that? And if you are okay with that, then, like, I can't reach you other than by telling you about the bottom line, right? But if you think about what your personal values are, right? Do they match up with the environment that you're working in? Do they match up with the environment that you are creating for other people? So I would challenge leaders to think about what their personal values are, what's really important to them as human beings, not just as sort of leaders of companies. And how is that either matching up or not matching up with the environment that you're creating? And I think, like, that conversation is one that can spark a little bit of curiosity. So, once you've established, like, what your values are, well, what are your behaviors like? Are they actually, again, in line with the things that you're valuing here, right? Are there mismatches? Where are there mismatches? Why are there mismatches? And it's kind of having that conversation and going into sort of that level of, like, having that level of curiosity about yourself. I think that, like, that's the thing that can maybe spark some of those conversations.
That is really potent, Peter. Thank you for that. I really felt that question, and I've not actually asked it well, if I'm honest, myself, to date. Yeah, to really ask directly, are people disposable to you? Like, without, I'm not judging you. I'm just genuinely, are people disposable to you?
Yeah.
It's a really powerful question.
And it's difficult as well, because those types of questions about values, like, that in itself requires an element of vulnerability.
It's really, my God, you really get me I'm not editing anything, because we're actually human beings and we ponder and we think, and but that's part of the platform,
Yeah.
Peter, is actually to have a pause for 20 seconds is actually sometimes longer than a lot of people I know in the business space have actually spent pausing.
Yeah.
In 25 years. So I like to leave those moments in. But I'm sort of almost talking myself out of a job here in a way, because I didn't realize I was coming on for career coaching with Peter today. But on the one hand, you can see it, like you say, on the one hand, values, you can look at this sort of harsh bottom line. Yes, we need to make money. Yes, you need to, keep the lights on, etc. But I guess this is also partly, when it comes to us as individuals in part of a system, is at what point do our own values become, at what point do they shine, or do you just let them be trampled over? This is happening at all level, right? Really, around this value story.
Yeah, and there's always a negotiation. There's always, like, a mismatch. Again, I'll give you an example from coaching, because that's just the world that I work in. Winning is important, and it's always going to be important, because we're talking about high-performing professional athletes and coaches, right? So winning is absolutely important. But there are going to be times when let's say I'm a coach, my personal values, what's important to me, might clash with that, right? So it's my kid's birthday, or it's the birth of my child, right? Am I, like, which value takes precedence, right? Is it my family? Like, is that the more important thing, or am I focused 100% on what I'm doing and committed to the sport, because my value is, like, winning and being dedicated to this team? Like, there are going to be times when, like, holidays are going to have to be postponed. Like, there are going to be times when I'm going to have to miss my kid's birthday. But there are also times when I can't do that, when actually, like, that family thing takes precedence, that health thing takes precedence, right? Like, that value at that time becomes more important. So it can't be one thing or the other the whole time. there's got to be a little bit of flex and a little bit of sway and a bit of negotiation. And we have to understand that like these values, like we have them in lots of different areas, and they are dynamic. They're changing depending on like time and place and context. So like that understanding, I think, gives us a little bit of flexibility and that ability to negotiate.
Gordon Bennett. Here we go, Peter. Here we go. I'm telling you, it's see now I want to get all systemy with you, because I think this is really important when we look at the bigger picture as well, right? Is that if we look at the macro, geopolitics, workplaces, high performance sport, the ability, you said this earlier on, the ability to actually create spaces where we can negotiate and actually have that dialogue right around what is your value, what is mine. Actually, you've just crossed mine. This is why. What I think we're seeing so much polarization now. That space to come together just to go, hey, I see you as the human, Peter. I don't fully agree with what you just did. Can we have a conversation about that? I just wonder, in your opinion, where is that space, and can we get that space back for dialogue, constructive debate?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what we're talking about really is like this idea of psychological safety. So I don't know if you've come across that. Yes. So Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety and sort of having this space where people can talk without fear of being ridiculed or sort of fear of having their opinion shut down. And the thing that I always say about psychological safety is like you can't tell me that you are creating a psychologically safe environment, right? You have to show me that you've created a psychologically safe environment by your behaviors, by the way what you do, by the way you respond, and the way you set up those situations in which other people are allowed to have their feedback. The other thing to kind of think about here is that like a psychologically safe environment isn't necessarily safe for everybody in the same way, right? So, for example, as a Black person, me expressing my opinion emotionally, like in a work environment, can be taken a different way to somebody who is white, right? Yep. A Black woman, for example, again, would have a different experience of being able to express their opinion and emotion than I would, right? So again, women are seen as, or kind of can be, the same behaviors can be interpreted in different ways, right? So if I'm, like loud and dominant in a meeting, I'm being assertive. If a woman is doing that, she's seen as like emotional, right? Men are passionate, women are emotional. So when we think about like psychological safety and creating those spaces, we have to show people that the environment is safe, not tell them. Yeah.
That's super, super helpful. Yeah, I actually spoke to Amy Edmondson about 4 years ago, actually.
Oh, did
when
you?
When her book, The Fearless Organization, came out. Yeah, I had a podcast called Values Through Vulnerability back in 2018 to 2020. And what I found, I don't know I'm curious actually with your own podcast, 80% Mental. Have you found over time that the conversations you have are almost like a mirror to some of the things you're thinking about yourself? Have you ever found that?
A little bit, yeah. And one of the, when the podcast first started out, it was all about sort of sport and performance psychology. And it was all just kind of like, here's some psychological skills and here's how you might apply them and here's what they are. And we'll kind of explain it in a bit more of a user-friendly way. A little bit of, light touch on what the research is saying and here's what this stuff means. And kind of as it's gone on, I found myself sort of thinking less and less about sport performance and more about sort of health and well-being and how, and this kind of is reflected in my research as well, how principles of psychology underpin our approaches to sort of stress and burnout and well-being and health and mental health. And the kind of conversation's gone way, way beyond sport in a ways which I didn't sort of imagine it would at the start. But, we talk about all sorts of things. We talk about like racism in sport. We talk about sort of well-being. We talked about disability. So, it's sort of, I would say it probably has kind of reflected what I'm thinking and the sort of the topics that are coming up, I think. Yeah.
And how cool in a way, sort of taking us back to the beginning of this conversation, Peter, how almost like it seems you had a view of it would look like X, but you had the openness and the curiosity to allow it to expand, right? Or to become something that it wasn't necessarily your predefined route, but you were open to allow that to emerge. And I think there's a lesson in that as well, right? And I see this is what I try to bring into the spaces I'm in, is to say, look, nothing is fixed.
Yeah.
Nothing is fixed, but that's still quite a departure for some people. To go, what do you mean the thing I've believed for 30 years isn't true? or I can actually change my
Well,
mind.
it's hard,
What?
isn't it? It's hard to do that, right? Because we have a sort of a way of looking at the world, and we don't like it when things that we come across contradict that view of the world. So we've kind of got two choices. We can either pretend that the thing that I've just learned doesn't exist and maintain my own worldview, right? Or I can change my worldview based on this new information. And that's a difficult thing to ask people to do. It really is. And, this is why this is why lots of kind of attitudes about lots of things that are happening in the world at the moment are difficult to shift, because changing my worldview means changing my entire identity sometimes.
Mhm.
And that's a really hard thing to ask people to do. So I get it. I get why people don't find it difficult to, okay, here's some new information. Oh, that changes things. Whereas here's some new information. I'm going to pretend that information doesn't exist, or I'm going to disagree with it, even though it's high quality research or whatever. So yeah, I think that's a difficult thing.
It's funny. This was really brought to me last weekend, actually, Peter. So I'm 50 this year, and I was having a chat with my mum. Didn't expect to go here today, but bear with me. And we actually spoke about politics for the first time ever, to the point where she was like, "Do you mind if I ask how you voted, Gary, in the past?" I'm like, "I don't mind. I'm really happy to have that conversation." But I've been in her life for 49 years, Peter, and only now has she sort of asked that question.
Yeah.
And I just thought I really appreciated it. I was like, "Oh wow, cool." And we had a brilliant conversation for half an hour afterwards. But it got me thinking: if that's my immediate mother, and I'm talking about trying to change someone that I'm not even familiar, I'm not related to them, I just work with them. It does. I just wanted to reinforce the magnitude, actually, to the challenge in a way, but also the opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is a challenge. I think again, if I had the answer to like how we do this, I would be really rich. Because I don't know. It's hard, but I think part of it is about talking to the ones who are listening, right? So if somebody is like that entrenched, like in their viewpoint, that this is the way that things are, right? And it doesn't matter what evidence you present or what arguments you present, that they're just not going to budge. Well, I'm just not going to waste my effort and time doing that, which sounds harsh, right? But it's also kind of true. And I think you can't, you might have heard this before. You can't reason people out of an argument that they weren't reasoned into. So lots of the time, people have sort of really strident viewpoints on the way things should be because it's like an emotional thing, right? Their argument is emotional; it's not rational. So if you kind of use logic and reason to say, well, maybe this is an approach that we should take. Look, here's a load of research that says that this is like a good way of doing things, or here's a load of research that suggests that this alternative viewpoint might be more beneficial here. Like if somebody, if their argument is based on emotion and not reason, like I can give you all the evidence in the world. It doesn't really matter. So we've got to kind of think about, okay, well, how can I maybe emotionally appeal to this person, or how can I just let them get on with it and whatever happens, happens.
Cool. So we're getting close to wrapping. I don't know if you realise, but like this is nearly half an hour.
Or is it? Okay.
How amazing is that? Like we just go meandering. I just love this. I'd like to wrap up, if I may, with one particular topic. So you just spoke about sort of evidence. This is something I've really been holding for a long time. And as a PhD, as a doctor, as someone still in academia, I'm really intrigued by this sort of interplay between evidence and emotion, because over the years, I've presented the evidence, the data, the reports, and then depending, of course, on the power structure you're part of, if you have a lot of power, you can decide whether or not that evidence matters, right?
Yeah.
And I'm curious to what extent is that a phenomena that happens regardless of the context, whether it's high performing sport, whether it's business, whether it's your family.
I think
ultimately, the more power, you get more choice to say yes, no, that's relevant, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that's just human nature as well, right? If we presented with evidence that we don't agree with, we can dismiss it.
Yeah,
I'm going to do things my way anyway. And there's if you think about like cognitive biases and like how we work. Have you come across the backfire effect?
I haven't come across that
So
actually.
the backfire effect is kind of like, so confirmation bias, where we go and seek out information that sort of confirms what we already think. right? And I will sort of ignore evidence to the contrary. I'll just pretend that doesn't exist. That's confirmation bias. The backfire effect is when you're presented with that contradictory evidence, and it actually makes your belief in what you think like stronger. So it doesn't sort of give you some evidence that sort of like completely is to the contrary of what you think, and your thoughts become stronger. You sort of become more entrenched in your beliefs when you're presented with evidence to the contrary. So like, again, we talk about reasoning people out of an argument they weren't reasoned into. It can actually like have a counterintuitive effect and make it worse, make the whole situation worse. People are more likely to believe what they already believe.
Last question. What's it like living inside your head with all this psychology and high performing sports day in, day out?
What's it like living inside my head? My brain never shuts off. It never shuts off. And it's just a constant layer of background chatter. I wouldn't recommend it.
On that note, everyone, go and check out Peter's podcast, 80% Mental. Also, do give Peter a follow. Anywhere else people can get hold of you? Anything else you're working on at the moment? Or
you can check out the website 80percentmental.com. So the podcast is kind of housed on there as well. So yeah, 80percentmental.com. It's all words.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Peter. Thank you for joining me, and thanks everyone for joining us. Let us know. I think the young kids say like, share, and all that, but I'm not going to say it. Have a good one. Cheers.